give him a warm welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello. So welcome to my session, Diversity, Chocolate and Safe Cracking. There is a safe and it contains some chocolate, although not quite enough for everyone, so you might have to fight about that later. So my name's John Ledrew, and over the last couple of decades of working in software, I've often been in positions where I was hiring people, building teams, building new teams, helping companies expand their teams. It just seemed to be something that I've been involved in. And I'm sure a lot of people who have been in these positions have asked themselves the question when faced with a candidate, is this person the right fit for our team? And it was only as I began to look at and research and think a little bit more about diversity, inclusion, and those ideas that I kind of asked myself what that question really meant and what I was really asking when I saw that. Because this is often a question you ask, not really at the time when you have assessed their skills. You're not saying, oh, is this person's Java skills going to fit with the Java skills of everyone else? Is this person's testing experience going to be a good fit for the testing experience of the rest of my testers? You're not really asking that question. You've already decided whether they have the right skills. You're saying, oh, is this the right cultural fit for our company? But surely I wasn't biased, right? Not me. It's everyone else who's sexist, homophobic, racist. It's not me, is it? Not you, I'm sure. I'll leave that question hanging deliberately. Before we go into this quite deep topic, I want to go into a couple of definitions that I think are important when discussing diversity and inclusion. This first one is the word meritocracy. So this is this idea that anyone in a company or in a society, even if we go broader, can achieve anything based only upon merit, based only upon their skills, their contribution, what they bring to the table, and obviously not based on anything else. This is really this is what, in fact, we often hear organizations saying that they are. You know, many companies, we run a meritocracy. It's only about skills and achievements and what they do here, what they achieve, how well they've done, what their qualifications are, maybe, whatever. We only look at those things. Maybe that's occasionally followed up in conversations relating to diversity with, we are colorblind, we are gender blind, we don't see these things. Again, it's a nice goal. And then we have inclusion. So inclusion is the simplest to define to some degree. It's just the state of being included, okay? But actually, inclusion has a lot of depth to it. We know there's a lot more to say here because this is something that most organizations fail to do. This is about looking at ensuring that people feel they belong, are engaged and connected with one another within the organization. I think this is a universal human right to embrace all people, for an organization, for you to be part of an organization that where you are connected and engaged and embraced because of your humanity, irrespective of your race, your gender, your disability, your ability, whatever that might be, or any other reason why you might be perceived as different from anyone else. And this also means ensuring that your organization sees the value of difference and fosters it. But we'll go into that a little more later. And then another one, diversity. This is easy. It means the presence of difference. Now, while this seems to be the goal of many organizations, this is actually it's the outcome of what a true meritocracy can achieve, included and supported by a culture of inclusion. So now we've got those out of the way. Could you raise your hand if you are privileged? Yeah. So would anyone be willing to say why they feel they are privileged? Go ahead. Western middle class white male, yeah. Woo! For us, we've got all the privilege, haven't we? Anyone else? Why do you think you're privileged?
I present as the gender I was born with.
Yeah, well, that's a really fantastic privilege. Anyone else? Anyone else want to say go? You got an education? Yeah, that's a pretty massive achievement.
I'm a white straight male. I've never faced any real discrimination in my life.
Yeah, exactly. White straight male. It's a nice group to be part of. It's interesting that one of the important things that I think people often misunderstand with privilege is they think that it's like a state that you choose. You know, that, oh, I'm not privileged because you're not an arrogant white middle-class man that looks down on everyone else, for example. But actually, it's not a state of that you choose to be. It's something you have and you are born with, whether it be because you're born with the gender that you that you still identify as, or whether it be that you happen to be a white Western male born in the right part of the world, born to the right coloured parents, born to who have the right background, who have the right income. And none of those situations, none of those circumstances are chosen. It is just what you are. You know, if you're born with skin that is anything other than white, born as anything other than a man, born as anything other than heterosexual, then you can't avoid prejudice in the society we are right now, basically. And actually, as we go into it a little deeper, you know, prejudice is actually experienced across that. A lot of people may not feel they've experienced prejudice, but even though I'm a white middle-class man, I'm also dyspraxic and have suffered a lot of prejudice throughout my life as a result of that experience. So, what's in a name? Thinking about privilege a little bit more. There was a study completed in 2002, and what they did was they gathered together a bunch of job ads in Chicago and Boston newspapers, and they got a group of authors to basically craft fake CV responses to all of these job ads, around 5,000 or so job ads and CVs they sent out. And what they did was they changed those CVs to either have an African-American sounding name or a white sounding name. People with a white sounding name had a 50% higher chance of a callback based on the same CV a lot of the time, just with a different name. On average, it was 10 CVs to get one callback for an African-American, for a white person, or a white-sounding name, and 15 CVs sent out for a African-American sounding name. Just by sounding too black decreased your chances, or rather just by being white or sounding white, you increased your chances. I met a chap who was speaking on diversity in Budapest at the end of last year, and his name, he's a black man, but his name is David McQueen. And he jokes in the session about how having a name that basically sounds white has done him a lot of favours in his career. So we have this problem, which is unconscious bias. Surely none of us are racist. Surely none of us are sexist. Surely none of us do all of these horrible things. There's a problem, which is that from the moment you pick up that potential hires CV, the moment you're looking over this information, you begin to build a picture in your mind about whether you like that person. It's almost like a kind of a social credit, like a friendship credit, like number of points. You know, you're looking over the CV and, oh, look, we went to the same university, ding, 10 points. You know, oh, look, they grew up in the same part of the country as me, ding, another 10 points. Okay. Oh, look, their favorite color is mauve, ding, maybe 5 points. Okay. And then, because you already love them, they were obviously invited to the interview by that point. And you're looking over and it's, oh, wow, their skin is pale like mine. 20 points. Oh, look, they are the same gender as me. We obviously understand each other completely. Ding! Oh, look, they seem about the same age as me. I wonder if they grew up watching Thundercats like I did. And then you actually start speaking to them. Oh, wow, they remember that weird professor at the uni we went to. Ding, another 50 points. Amazeballs, their dad knows my uncle. What a small world, right? Amazing. And OMG, they watch Thundercats. I love this person. They are hired, obviously. They won on that. But interestingly, you could be about 30 seconds into the interview by this point, and you've already decided that this person is right based on all of those things. And while that made that sound slightly conscious, It's not conscious. None of those things are conscious. Those are just things that are clocking up in your mind, subconsciously deciding whether or not this person is right. And then you look at them and you decide that they are much better than the last person you saw because, she didn't like Thundercats, whatever. So we have a whole bunch of biases that we are unfortunately affected by. Now, these are unconscious biases. I'm not going to go in massive depth into each of them, but you probably will experience some of these or have experienced these anyway. So you've got conformity bias, and this is where an individual feels that a group that they are leaning towards, when a group is leaning towards a particular thing, this was done in a study in, I think it was the 60s or the 70s, I can't remember, where they basically presented a group. You would arrive as as the subject of this test, and there's 6 people in the room, and you're all shown a set of 3 lines, okay? And you're shown another line and said, which of these lines is the same length as, which of the 3 lines is the same length as the line you're presented with? What you don't know is the 5 other people in the room are actually there as shills. They're not really, they're all actors, okay? Now, they've all been instructed to answer the wrong answer, obviously the wrong answer. And in something like 40% of cases, or even higher in some cases, depending on the circumstances, the subject is likely to go with the obvious wrong answer in the wake of peer pressure from everybody else. So this is where you tend to go along with the group, what the group thinks. Now, the problem with this with regards to diversity and regards to inclusion in hiring is that what you end up doing is, especially if you pass a CV round and you do those kinds of things, it's almost like a cascade. The CV gets past the first person. Oh, I quite like this person, hands it to the next one with a, I quite like this one on the CV as they forward the CV around the room. Yeah, I quite like this person as well. By the time you've got 5 people that have told you that you quite like that person's in with the team. It doesn't really matter what the last person thinks of the individual or their skills, or maybe that person actually has some awareness of unconscious biases and has decided to assess that person on what they really think of them and what they really think about their skill match, but they're very unlikely to actually then say what they think in that circumstance. There's something called beauty bias. So this comes back to some anthropology. Better looking people tend to be hired, tend to be considered to be more likely to be more successful. The issue here is obviously that it's not just about better looking people, obviously, it's about what you subjectively consider to be more beautiful, and that is strongly dictated by what you consider to be more similar to yourself. People that are more likely, you're more likely to find people of pale skin or the same skin colour as yours, not necessarily the same gender, obviously. But all of those things are going to affect your assessment of these people at an unconscious level before you've actually looked at their skills. Interestingly, recruiters, when filling a position of someone that has left, weirdly tend to look for people, I can't remember the study now, but they tend to look for people that are similar to the person they were replacing, which is an interesting odd quirk of that, and it's related to the same bias. Then you have affinity bias. Affinity bias is what we were talking about before a little bit, about when you find you build an affinity with this person. Oh, they went to the same university. Oh, they grew up in the same part of town. I'm falling in love with this person immediately because they're exactly like me. And we have a thing called the halo effect. So this is where we look down someone's CV and we go, wow, they got a first at Cambridge. That's impressive stuff. The fact that they failed to have pretty unimpressive results everywhere else in their CV, it suddenly becomes less relevant because everything is kind of shielded by the halo that was created by this amazing achievement. Then you have the horns effect, which is the exact opposite of that. This often plays more effect in an interview setting. So you could have someone that comes in and they are, let's say they have a particularly strong accent, or they have some other kind of potentially negative thing that you might assess with them. Now that might then play against all of the fantastic achievements they've made on their CV. And we have a thing called similarity bias. So similarity bias means that we are more likely to be hiring individuals, and this is similar to affinity, it's hiring individuals we see ourselves in. Now, that can go a little deeper than the affinity bias, which is often based on those kind of circumstantial things, like, oh, we went to the same university, or parents know each other, but more just when you begin to see similar personality traits. If that person, for example, an extrovert is more likely to hire another extrovert, for example, and those sorts of circumstances. This person seems really chatty like me, so I think they're awesome, as opposed to the opposite of that. We have a thing called contrast bias. Now, this is something to be really aware of when reviewing CVs. Rather than comparing the individuals, you're going through 30 CVs, rather than comparing the individuals against, the job requirements, you compare them against each other. So what you tend to do is you go through good, 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 and this one is good just because the last person wasn't quite as good. Well, actually, it doesn't really matter how they compare to each other. You're hiring one person. It matters how they compare to the actual job. How do they actually relate to the job you're looking at? This can happen to anyone when you're sat monotonously going through. If you've got a stack of CVs on your desk, anyone knows how dull and painful that can be. And that's what happens when we do that. When we're tired, when we're exhausted, all of these biases affect us to a much greater degree as well. Another one, attribution bias. So this is when we do something badly, we tend to attribute the bad thing that happened to other people. So if I screw up, it's kind of a good analogy is if you're walking down the road and you trip up over a brick, let's say, that's been left in the road, your first thing is, what idiot left that in the bloody path? What annoying, irresponsible, it's all their fault. So it's kind of like these things tend to be down to our own external blame. We attribute the blame externally. And then, but actually, when we see it happening to other people, we tend to blame them. Or we tend to attribute either the bad thing to something they must have done, or the good thing to their lucky circumstances. Neither of those things do particularly well when assessing individuals. And then we have confirmation bias. This is probably one we've heard about, although in the context of all of those, this means that when we've made a decision in anything, we tend to go, oh, okay, well, we're going to look to try and subconsciously prove, and disregard evidence that disproves the decision that we've made. We think this person is amazing because they went to the same university as us. So anything that might potentially say that they're not amazing, we're very likely to disregard in those circumstances. So that's an interesting one. It's bad enough in itself. It's something that we're aware of, and it affects many more than just kind of recruitment decisions that we might be doing. But actually, in the context of the fact that I've just been through 8 previous items there, if I actually change my slides, there we go. If you realise that actually that decision on whether or not you like that person or not is only compounded by the confirmation bias, because you've decided you like them based on an unconscious bias, and now you've got another unconscious bias that kicks in to make sure you actually do go through with that decision. It only confirms it. Okay, so we've had a little chat about some of the issues, some of the problems that we face in diversity, why this is a really hard thing to achieve, even just that hiring decision. Let's look at why we need it. Okay, so why do we actually need diversity? Why is this a good thing? I think that kind of we're in the 21st century now. I think we kind of all accept that there is a moral imperative to hire a diverse group of people, and that's a good idea. We shouldn't have any discrimination in our practices on any of those factors. I think that the majority of people believe those ideas, or are moving to believe those ideas, or are being evolved out of their organizations to believe that basic idea. But actually, I want to focus on the business case here. Like, why is this actually a good idea? Not only because we should be doing it, and should is not really a great word to be using in these circumstances, nor is moral imperative. Because, believe it or not, the large multinational organizations that are deciding on these things don't really attach much to the moral imperative unless it makes their PR team wince occasionally. So let's look at what the business case is. So in 2015, McKinsey published a big report called Diversity Matters. They researched hundreds of organizations, generally, kind of the equivalent, I think it was largely US-based companies, but these were public listed companies above a certain number of staff, and looking at And these companies were across the UK, US, Canada, Latin America. And what they found was that organizations that were in the top quartile for ethnic, racial, and gender diversity were much more likely to have financial returns above the national industry median for their group. Okay? So these companies were more likely to be successful as a result of their diversity. They point out this isn't a tight causal relationship. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff here, but interestingly, the inverse is also true. They found the exact inverse, which is that the companies in the fourth quartile for those things were also significantly more likely to be in the to have returns below the national industry median for their group. So why does it improve results? So the diversity, this particular report says, well, in the first thing, we've got a war for talent. Most of the organizations, these days, most organizations are looking for knowledge workers. You know, we want knowledge workers. We want people that are problem solving and doing creative stuff, innovation. And all of these things are the hot buzzwords for the kind of teams we want in almost any industry that's showing any kind of growth at all. And if you are genuinely prejudiced in your hiring practices, well, you're kind of ignoring a large chunk of the market. You know, you are going to be more successful simply because you're more likely to get the high-skilled candidates because you're not closing off a large chunk of the market when you get to those hiring decisions. A Gallup poll also found that only 13% of employees were actively engaged at work. And interestingly, one of the key areas that when they interviewed millennials specifically, at what would kind of increase their engagement, and one of the key factors was an environment that demonstrates a strong commitment to diversity. So to the millennial generation that are now growing up, actually working in an organization that actually is supporting and clearly encouraging and is supportive of diversity is a really important part to what makes those organizations attract that kind of Generation Y group. And also, there's another interesting study found that, on average, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender recruits were more highly skilled and also more likely to hold advanced degrees. So again, if you're going to be discriminating against those groups for whatever reason, either subconsciously or hopefully not, but consciously, you're going to be missing out on the very people that could be transforming your organization, could be coming up and helping your organization have the innovative ideas that you need to compete in the market. There's another thing called customer orientation. So this is talking about how we actually need organizations to better reflect their customer base within the organization. Why is this? Well, if we're building products for a particular market, it's kind of important. You know, funnily enough, especially if we're building software, the bulk of software engineers right now happen to be white male in their 25 to 30 something kind of range, okay? That's the sort of typical demographic of your software engineer in the majority of organizations. Well, unbelievably to many, that's not actually the typical consumer. The typical consumer, interestingly enough, is significantly more female. By 2025, women are expected to own 60% of all personal wealth and control £400 million more per week in expenditures than men. So if you're hoping that women are going to buy your product and make those decisions, it probably is a good idea to have some of those women on your team. Interestingly as well, in the United States, estimates of buying power indicate that LGBT individuals controlled $790 billion in 2012, and African Americans are expected to control $1.1 trillion by 2015. This is from an older study, obviously. What's interesting is that when you look at that, it's like, again, if you are ignoring those groups, then you're ignoring the people that are more likely to be in your customer base, the people you're more likely to be providing, which means that you're significantly impaired at delivering software that is going to match the needs of those people, because you will not know what the hell those needs are. So Another interesting thing was just around decision making. So they found that when you include, and when they looked at management teams, so this is specifically looking at executive teams that had a higher proportion of either gender diversity or ethnic diversity, one of the things they found is that the presence of women and minority members on the leadership team enhanced the decision making and the problem solving within those teams. That is a really important statistic, especially since there was another statistic, I think, that showed something 1 in 6 or FTSE 100 organisations are managed or led by people named John or Dave. I think they make up the top 2 names across organisations in thing, which is I'm assuming that neither of them have great degrees of ethnic diversity, but then I'd be affected by the same biases that were affected by the people reading their CVs in the first place that hired them. So let's look at why this is. I want to use this as my visual metaphor. So some of you have some stickers on you. So what I'd like to begin with is, could I get 4 people who are blue, 4 blue people to come up front, if that's okay. A few of you easy access. 1, 2, 3. I need 1 more blue person. Any blue people? All right. So what I'd like you to do is to line up along this side of the safe. Okay. So line up here. So the rule is with this safe is that you can only stand in front of, you can't move, and you can only stand in front of the side which you match the padlock to. Okay. So what I'd like to do is to give you, in this position, you can work out how to thing. You've got 3 minutes to crack this safe from now. Go. You can't move. You can just look at it. All of the information you need to crack the safe is in front of you, kind of. Good luck. No. Conveniently, I point out that this is also an entirely white male group. Thoroughly disadvantaged on every front, I'm afraid.
Speak up.
Okay, so just say.
You don't have to
So we can see stickers. We've got stickers for each of different colours with some numbers on. No.
Can you do what? Well, you can if you think it will help. You can't just lift the safe up. There is an obvious security problem with this safe. It's pretty easy to actually break into. The problem with metaphors, no one thinks of security with metaphors.
Have you considered asking us if the numbers are the same on this side?
Well, they wouldn't know that.
Same on this side?
Can't view the problem from that angle.
They can ask us.
Can they? No, you're not allowed to help them.
The mindset is not getting them.
We're white privileged men, don't we?
Yeah, exactly. They don't need any help at all. You are allowed to give up if you think it's hopeless. You won't be punished for like not. All right. You give up. It's fine. I'll be honest. It's a trick because you can't really solve it at this point. Not from one else. So what I'd like is now a slightly more diverse group. I'd like 1 of each colour to come up, if that's okay. So you can sit down now. Thank you very much for failing to open the thing and being a suitably useless group of white privileged men. I'd also like 1 of each colour. I'd also like ideally 1 half women, half men. Just because of an experiment. The last time I did it, I did. So what colour are you?
Blue.
Blue, all right, blue, green. So you need to stand in front of the padlock that matches your colour. So I still need I think you need to be over here.
Oh, sorry.
It's all right. Could I get a red, so someone with red and someone with orange? Oh, we just need a red sticker. Another man. Another white privileged man. Oh, brilliant. All right, we got a man.
So did you want a white privileged man?
Oh, no, sorry, yeah. It's up to you. You can fight it. Yeah, this is awkward now. yeah. All right, so Now, we're going to repeat the exercise, okay? So you have 3 minutes to work out, so I suggest you talk to each other.
So I've got green.
Yellow, there's 7. I shouldn't have looked at
It's a little bit like the Crystal Maze. Remember that? A lot more hair, but...
So my blue one is 1792. Does everyone else have the same blue?
Yep.
Yeah?
792.
No, I've got 213.
What's the prefix
For
of
the-
the blue one? Is it a 1 or a 2?
2.
And what's yours?
Mine's
Is
1792.
it the prefix of the
The
bit that
prefix.
comes before a dash?
Oh yeah, that's one.
That's 1. So I think yours is the first combination, or is the second combination. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's good.
So what's the first one?
1792. Oh, sorry, 792.
792.
On my green as well.
Yeah.
I've got 4, 3, 2. Who's got pink? Who's got the pink one?
I've got 3, 5, 3.
Oh, look at that.
Leslie, do you have 2?
Yeah, it's
Um,
98.
Who's got the second one? Pink?
Me, it's 82.
I just want to say, it's proved correct. When I last did this, I realised the diverse group that came up afterwards was a diverse group of colours, but all white men. As it happened, they self-selected, and you did it in about half the time that they did. So I reckon that says something. Congratulations, you solved the safe. Awesome. You should maybe distribute. I don't know, what the health and safety requirements of flinging Quality Street out into the audience? You think it's all right? All right. Watch out for your glasses and things.
You can just lift the safe.
Oh, yeah, well, exactly, yeah. I wasn't looking at that point. There you go. I don't know what you're getting. I mean, some poor person is going to end up getting, all strawberry cream. Oh, yeah, just chuck them out. Every single talk is always made better by lobbing small hard things at the audience.
If there's a horse receiving, it's because of when.
There are more. If you haven't managed to achieve a chocolate, you can just come and grab them. So what am I trying to demonstrate with this? One of the interesting things is that this is meant to be a metaphor for a problem that we are solving. Okay, so imagine that this could be a question like, how do we best build a particular piece of software for our target market? These open-ended, creative questions. And granted, this is a little bit, this is contrived, clearly. But imagine the problem is that when you have a group of people who all look at the problem from one angle, because they all come from the same university, and they are all roughly the same age, and they grew up in the same place, and actually what you end up with is a group of people that tend to be very agreeable to one another. They tend to agree with each other a lot. They don't challenge each other's assumptions very much. Now, they will come to a solution, okay, these people, these groups of these very homogeneous groups will arrive at a solution. But what research has shown is that they don't arrive at the best solution. They don't get there, but the best solutions are born out of that conflict and disagreement. What I call this is kind of degrees of difference. It's fairly mediocre drawing. So if you imagine that you've got everyone looking at the problem and they all come from a similar background, a similar situation, they're all looking at the problem from one place. If you have a situation where you're able to gain and increase the heterogeneity in a group, then what you end up with is a group of people that can actually look at and approach a problem from multiple perspectives and challenge each other appropriately. So one of the issues here, and the most common thing that I am asked when I have spoken to people about this, is if you have loads of different people with different backgrounds and different religions and different genders and different sexualities, etc., of all of these people, all you end up with is just a bunch of people challenging each other all the time. You just end up with conflict, basically. And that's absolutely true. There's also been studies to show that that the journey to that solution is harder. It's a harder path to get to work in a more diverse group. That doesn't mean it's unsatisfying. It just means it's harder, okay? But you always get to a better result in almost all circumstances. Now, what's really important with this, and this is the importance of facilitation here, is that good facilitative leadership is going to guide teams that are in conflict, that are arguing, that are disagreeing, to a point where they can find consensus and can move forward with those decisions. And that's what's really important here. When you're struggling with situations like conflict and disagreement and those things, that's the art of the facilitator. That is where, as technically as scrum masters or team leads or anyone that is in that facilitative position can help build consensus on a team. So we mentioned subconscious biases and unconscious biases at the beginning. One of the questions here is, how do we actually tackle them? How do we approach these things? One of the important things to remember is that all of these things are completely natural. They are completely unintentional in most situations. They do affect our decisions, and importantly, they can be mitigated. Okay? You can't get rid of them because we're human beings. These things are actually built into our evolution, in fact, to some degree. That the basis of many subconscious biases is built on our ability to stereotype and to label. And that's based on a survival mechanism. It's very good for us to accidentally and mislabel a lion hiding in the bushes. Because if we get that wrong, the most thing we do is embarrass someone that was having a wee in the bushes, and we just ran away screaming after catching a glance of them. If it was in fact a lion, we'd be significantly more alive having run away screaming, or perhaps gone quietly so as not to obviously draw attention to the lion. And that was, that's an evolved bias that we have. That's there because we are more likely to survive by making that mistake. It doesn't help us in recruitment or building diverse teams particularly, but it is something that almost all of us have built in. So how do we avoid it? The most important thing you can do is to build awareness of it. And in fact, there's been some studies that show that if you read up on those things, so for example, I Googled, did a little bit of research to find the list of 9 that I felt most affected kind of the recruitment process. If you Google those, read up on them, print them out. Now, if you read those, literally just before you go into an interview, just before you start the process of reviewing those 20 CVs that have been emailed to you, you are going to be more aware of those biases, and as a result, they're going to become far more conscious. You'll have more conscious awareness of them, and they're going to affect you less. The other things you need to do are just don't rush decisions. Just take a bit of time. Review the CVs, stick the ones that you kind of like to one side, go to lunch, come back after an hour, have a conversation with someone else about it, discuss your ideas. And also always back up the decisions that you've made with some evidence. Always ask yourself why. Question the assumptions that you're making, because they're likely to be guided by those biases. So they're the things that are most likely to do it. The other things that you can do at a policy level is organizations have seen quite a lot of success now in doing blind CVs. So this is literally the process of at the HR teams generally who kind of get the CVs in before they hand it out to the hiring managers and the decision makers. Almost all of those identifying informations and things that could kind of tie you to a particular bias are kind of what's it called, redacted from the document. So you end up with a thing, you don't know what the name of this person is, you don't know what universities they went to, what areas they grew up in, anything that could kind of sway your biases in a way that isn't really related or useful to the job. Is there. Some people argue that it's useful to know if they went to Cambridge or, Derby University or whatever, I don't know. I personally don't see these days that there's a massive amount of difference between the universities that people went to in most roles anyway, certainly in IT. So we spent a lot of time looking at kind of why this is important. We've just gone into a little bit of that area. So I want to look at inclusion now. So one of the things that I did as part of the research for this is I spent a day at ThoughtWorks in Manchester. Is anyone here a thought worker by any chance? That's out of interest. No, good. No. So I spent the day with them, and the main reason why I wanted to speak to them was because the current international average for women in technical roles is 17% of the workforce. As of 2017, they have 38%. Their 2018 goal is to get is to breach 40, is their aim. They also have 52% of women in their hiring pipelines as well. So 52% of the people applying for their roles and in their pipelines are women. And they've done, over the last 10 years or so, it's been a massive focus for them. Now, I'm not going to go into all the things they did at the recruitment end, because I think some of that stuff was some of the things we've already covered. We also don't have enough time. But I do want to look at some of the things they do on the inclusion side. So what are they actually doing to make an environment that makes women want to stay? Because that's more important, actually, than just hiring them. A lot of companies can get over the point at which we remove those biases. In fact, there's 1 million guides these days online to how you can, for example, read up on subconscious biases before you interview, make sure this stuff goes right, and you will end up hiring women, and then they leave. And we want to know why this is. So this is focusing specifically on gender diversity, which has been the focus that ThoughtWorks have been. They put a lot of effort into that. They also appreciate that actually ethnic diversity in the IT sector isn't something that really any organization is addressing at the moment, and it's significantly a much, much, much bigger problem in certain areas, especially people of Afro-Caribbean and African descent in the IT sector. It's something like well under 5% of the workforce in IT, and that's a much bigger challenge, frankly, than gender diversity. Also, that includes looking at things like intersectionality and breaking down and looking at black women, for example, who are almost completely unrepresented in a lot of the IT industry. So either way, we're not looking at everything, but I wanted to discuss some of the things that they've done. So one of the interesting things they have is even though they're a consultancy firm, they are completely and utterly open about supporting flexible hours. I spoke to a number of women that are based in their Manchester office that will work part-time, and they work that out with them, so that means they're able to return to work more easily with more affordable childcare. One of the things, and it's not specifically looking at female diversity, but this is a new office they've moved into, and they're kind of a simple thing around inclusion. All of the corridors in their building were designed to comfortably fit 2 wheelchairs, okay? Seems like a really small issue, especially for an organization, as it happened at Manchester. They don't actually have anyone on staff at Manchester that uses a wheelchair. But the point is that seems like a really small thing, but can you imagine how frustrating it would be if you're wheelchair bound and you come against somebody else who's also wheelchair bound, or even, who knows, maybe just the tea trolley, and you end up having to reverse back out of a 10-meter hallway? That's not going to make you feel particularly anything other than in the way, and that's one of the important things here. They have 2 event spaces, and all of them have hearing loops to support people with various hearing difficulties. Now, this is one that I found interesting. They also have unisex toilets. Why do you think unisex toilets help with diversity? Out of interest. Yeah, go ahead.
Because your gender isn't really anyone's business.
Yeah, exactly.
And so you should be able to just go without anyone questioning.
Absolutely. So the basic idea here is, well, if you were either transitioning in your gender, or if you just identify as non-binary. If you identify as non-binary, which toilet do you use, male or female? I don't know. It's irrelevant. It's also a really, to me, it seems like a really pointless idea having specific gender toilets, because the only difference between the toilets is the urinal, and I don't really know any men that actually enjoy peeing in front of other men, except we insist on putting urinals in toilets. It's like this perpetual thing. There's a whole culture of awkwardness around peeing next to other men. And yet we insist on their presence. It would make everyone feel more comfortable to have unisex toilets. They also have baby changing facilities on site. Again, there was one woman, she wasn't in when I was there, that had a baby that regularly would bring her little baby in while she was in the office. She was often on site anyway, but it was something that they considered. And they also have a quiet room for contemplation, which is used for prayer and used for prayer, meditation, just needing to get away, needing a quiet space to get away for people that are more neurally diverse. And there's some small things. Now, these are not this is not an extensive list. This is some of the things that they have done to generally try and foster a culture of inclusion. But what this really comes down to is humans, okay? So if you want to foster a culture of inclusion in your organization, it just comes down to the simple point of you are hiring human beings, and human beings will have needs. They will need things from you as an organization. They will need support in different areas of life. Now, that is the same whether or not you are a black gay woman or if you're a white male. Everyone actually has needs. In fact, one of the interesting points they made out, and it's an area, again, that I can get into in depth, is this concept of intersectionality. This came up from their, they have a group called Intertwined. Now, this is a group to support diversity in the organization. Interestingly, Intertwined, the Intertwined group within ThoughtWorks, contains pretty much all ThoughtWorks staff. Why does it contain all ThoughtWorks staff? Because the concept of intersectionality tells us that actually we tend to apply a label like white male, like female with green hair, for example. And those people have specific needs. But actually, people aren't just white male. I'm also a parent, okay? I'm also a single dad. I'm also dyspraxic. And actually, all of those things combined actually create what my identity really is and create and decide upon what my needs are to an organization. What you end up finding, and there was a particular case where intersectionality wasn't taken into consideration, where a woman was, a black woman in the States was challenging or sued an organization for not hiring her. Or was it pay? I think it was a pay difference. Apologies, I'm trying to remember the details. It was a pay difference. So she was arguing that she'd been paid less than other people. And interestingly, the judge threw it out because they said, well, interestingly, this person, they do hire women, and your pay wasn't, particularly different. And they do hire black people, and your pay was more than most of those black people. And she was like, well, I was a black woman working in a professional part of the organization. But interestingly, what you look at is you go, well, actually, all of the black people that worked in the company were generally men, and they worked in, this was a manufacturing company, and they worked in the manufacturing on the factory floor doing labor-intensive work. All of the women in the organization, who I point out were mostly white, were working in clerical positions, okay? And this black woman, who was being paid not quite enough to be comparable to the other women in the organization, but more than some of the other black people, the judge sort of said, well, look, you're trying to argue that somehow as a black woman, that's a special group. No, you're just a woman in this situation, because they were arguing that. And that's because we don't see these crossovers. In fact, intersectionality affects everybody. These ideas, we're all part of more than one group. Now, that is a really deep topic. There are some fantastic TED Talks and a whole load of writing around this idea of intersectionality. But this is an important thing, is that we are all human beings. And right now, we can only employ human beings. Human beings are the entire resource. 100% of the people we hire are always going to be human. And humans always have a diverse group of needs, regardless of their skin color or gender or anything else. It doesn't actually matter that much, because they all have needs. And those needs are going to be different. And if we are not open and show empathy and discuss those needs with those people and create an environment where it is safe for those people to be open about their needs, or even not even have to discuss them. Like, you know what? It's not inclusive if you hire someone who's non-binary and they have to tell you that it's really, really uncomfortable for them to have to choose which toilet to use on a day-to-day basis. If you hire someone who's transitioning and they say, I don't know why I have to be forced into this conversation. If you force a woman to have to ask, or in fact, for that matter, a parent of either gender, to have to ask in a work-frenzied, hours-focused organization that they're going to need some reduced hours because they have children they need to pick up on a daily basis. All of those conversations put those people at a disadvantage. And creating an organization where you're kind of conscious of the human beings that work for you enough that you can put in policies that actually support those individuals before they're put in that conversation is essential. So, for me, diversity is the fuel that powers our new creative economy, and inclusion is what enables it. Organizations that are focused on the human beings they employ to support their needs employ and support their needs will be the organisations that can compete and, frankly, the organisations that survive. As W. Edwards Deming said, survival is optional. No. So thank you very much.